Well, greetings, everybody. The beauty of this is informal while being factual. What does that mean? There is a lot of opinion and innuendo that we have gone through over the course of the last 5 months. Some of it has come from authority, some of it has come from fear, some of it has come from speculation, some of it has come from colleagues answering. But I thought having a doctor who actually practices medicine and goes through this with his group of people that he treats and his extended group of people from whom he gets information may be a vital part. Full disclaimer, we don't claim to give any prescriptions. This is just a corporate broadcast about how do we find hope in these times. I'm a hope giver. That's what I've been for the last 30 years. Most of you who come to me for very light advice. I'm not a counselor. I'm a motivational speaker. My natural tendency is to believe what the last person told me, so I'd be a horrible counselor. But during my trials and trips that I've taken to India, yes, both are synonymous. Sometimes trips in India are you have to have some trial. I've been afflicted with different kinds of ailments, and the good doctor who's on the program with us has been the one who has taken care of me remotely because he knows me as a diagnostic physician and as a friend. He made recommendations that have given me healing on the road and allowed me to move forward. His accolades are as long as him, and I would recommend you check him out, and our website should have a description of his background. He's the founder and CEO of Migration Medicine based in Hyderabad. His philanthropic work extends to communities and parts where people don't have access to medicine. Here is a man who truly practices what he preaches. If there's an old adage that I remember when I think of Dr. Raj Kumar, it is this adage, physician, heal thyself. So here's a man who actually practices what he preaches, and he's more than a doctor, he's a very, very dear friend, someone I consult with on a regular basis, someone I talk to on a regular basis. The fact that he's a guest on my program is just that, a guest, but he's a very dear friend. For those of you looking for additional information on him, please feel free to reach out to our office. But like I said, if I read his bio, it would take forever. But he's lived the journey we are about to explore. So, Doc, good to have you on the program with us all the way from Hyderabad.
Thank you so much, Dr. Krish. And for those who are surprised to hear the word Dr. Krish, should know that it is said a cheerful heart gives life to the bones. And in that regard, he has to be an orthopedician. I'm going to confer an orthopedics degree on him and say he's going to really make life to the bones. His humor is amazing and stunning, and it's really engaged us with wisdom and wit at the same time. And it's a great privilege for the son of the soil from India and the mentee of the great Zig Ziglar. It is my own privilege to be part of this story. And thank you, Dr. Krish, for inviting me. And I hope nobody sues you for taking up that degree which has been conferred upon you now.
Well, a couple of honorary ones have been given, but like I said, anytime they give you honor and you claim the honor, there is the great peril of dishonor around the corner, so you don't claim it. So those who can give it freely, take it away freely. So in the movie business, they say take and retake, right? So sometimes the take is based on your experience and the retake is based on your error. So what I wanted to do was have just a candid conversation, and some of the things I wrote was, you know, the factuality of what we are engaging ourselves in has gone through many different iterations. I mean, I was in Albania when this contagion broke, and the country just shut down, and 4 days later there were tanks on the street and people were all in their houses. Each country has dealt with it differently. My dad, of course, lives in India. India had different things. They had different kinds of successes dealing with it. But per capita, of course, you know, even globally, doctors of Indian origin seem to be the ones that are fighting this on the front line in every country. So that way, I think for the universal audience that will join us today and will watch this recording later, I think you will not be a stranger in that regard, because most of them, their physicians tend to be people who are from India. So, well, the first question I had was, as a diagnostic physician coming from a scientific background, how do you cope with and advise those who have tested positive, your staff, some of your patients? What are some of the advices you're giving them that give them some kind of hope and realize that you still know what the heck you're talking about?
I think firstly, there's been an information glut that's happened. It's almost like an information pandemic that's happened alongside the actual pandemic. And this has created a whole psychology of fear, panic, and from what should have been a genuine concern and a genuine care that should have happened, there has been almost a knee-jerk response, not only amongst the people, but also amongst the scientific community. Strangely enough, the way it has happened across the globe, more of it was because of the surprise element. When we were just cruising along so well in our lives, the surprise element is what hit us the most. And I guess that's what's taken everybody off their comfort zone suddenly. And the response in situations like this is anybody's guess, because it's pretty random at times. So what is the need of the hour, and what that I usually look at when it comes to advising people who are actually affected or turned positive is firstly develop a relationship of trust. And it's important for them to understand that unless there is trust, there is no relationship for management of the case that can ever happen. And this case is not a case anymore, it's a person. And irrespective of all the world statistics, the fear factor is because a person is not a statistic. So they think that it's going to affect me, irrespective if it's 1 in 10,000 or 1 in a million, that one could be me, because they see the worst case scenarios as the fear factor because of the short duration and mortality that has been noted to be on the higher side. But of course, even so, in other influenza pandemics too, and even annual influenza deaths and many other things too. But being a surprise element, I think trust is one thing first, is something that I usually adhere to when I have to have a conversation. The other is to give them the confidence that there is something that is coming up as treatments, because the myth went around that there is hardly any treatment for this. In a sense, in the initial stages, it was probably so, but as each day progresses, man is a very robust creation. I think he's gifted immensely with the ability to beat any kind of situation, and man is essentially a hopeful being, and he's not an island, as John Donne says, and we are a community of people. And there comes an amazing collaborative effort that's happened across nations. And I think this is something which translates across when you deal with the patient also, to say, give a confidence that what is standing before you is not just a doctor or a medical person or a professional who's probably charging you a fee, but an entire scientific community that's concerned about the entire globe, because it's not a concern about you, nor your family, nor your community alone. It is national, international, global. Not only that, it's not only temporal. This is the way of life in the days to come, in the sense that there could be pandemics worse or less, but we have to deal with it. So I would say confidence is what goes very strongly when you have to actually deal with a person who is actually tested positive. And honesty is built up, and there should be, of course, the aspect of confidence being given to them about the treatments available, and you have to lay out a plan which is communicated to them very clearly. It's clarity of communication which is actually the key. Many times it is the fear factor comes in, especially when communication is not clear. The channels are not clear. The channels can be the hearer or the speaker. I think it's very important to develop a habit of good articulation towards what you are believing, and in an honest and transparent way to be able to communicate to the patient, so that even if it's a real mountain to climb, they would do it. And with confidence that you give and a hope that you give. And doctors are usually those who actually give hope. They're not the people who actually say the worst of things possible. Having said that, It is not about a false hope, but about a genuine hope. And a lot of things are happening. So I would say these are some of the factors that I usually look at in clinical practice when it comes to a good communication channel, a trust building, and also the confidence of an entire scientific community that is out there to help you.
Hmm. Well, you gave about 4 or 5 salient points, which I took some notes on. One thing that really struck me was that while you're doing it at the individual level, that person is a person, not a statistic. While
Absolutely.
you're dealing with it in a global level with a community, the future of humanity is the goal, not the individual case, because like anything else in the past, we have had to use individual cases to find out the broader nature of the ailment. So the second component is that when you look at that honesty and that trust factor that builds up between the physician and the patient, I know that in India it's a little more personal. I mean, I still have relationships with my childhood doctors. It's just something that has stayed with us. Whenever I go back to Vizag, I still meet the people who treated me as a child, and they're 85 years old and retired, but they still are so happy to see me, and they pull my. We don't have that kind of. Most of the rest of the world, there is an impersonal relationship, and I think that has exacerbated the fear, because you mentioned trust. Could you go over maybe a little more on the trust factor as to from just a physician standpoint as to why that is important for the psyche of those that are afflicted?
Uh, I mean, uh, the unknown is something what everybody is afraid of. And that is something which only a person who can hold his hand in the dark, only they are the ones who they trust and say, I'm going to walk with you because it's unknown. The trajectory is unknown in the future. The prognosis, I'm not too sure of what's going to be. How I'm going to respond to the treatment is an unknown kind of thing, in a sense. So when a person looks at the doctor and he says, this is a person who is not only a person who has character, who will tell me honestly what things are, but is also not a pessimist. He's an optimist. He's not going to tell me the worst of things, but also the best of things possible. Hope actually gives a positive connotation in one's own sense of healing, actually, when they walk forward, actually. And one need not be really cynical about seeing the picture around us, but treat the person as individual and say, this is where it's going to be. The other aspect is that the competence is something that is that the person is usually familiar with. Either the person has a very good name in the society because he's been a good doctor, or is well-known person who's published journal articles and is treated well, or respected in the community. More importantly, as you very rightly said, it's the family physician or the general practitioner or the primary care physician, whatever name you give him. He's the first point of contact for you. It is so true what you said, that when people are just sucked into the medical system, they are disconnected from the points of trust and contact. In fact, the primary care physician is the point of trust for him. It's not the doctor in the hospital. He doesn't even know his face. He doesn't even know who he is. And it is vital to create that communication channel with the primary care physician or a trustworthy person who would say, this is the medical jargon that I can translate across to the family in terms that they've understood over years and years of relationship. You brought that as a very vital factor on the relationship building on trust. And it is also the aspect of how you, build that relationship over a period of time, because it's not exactly a short illness. It's going to go on for about 2 weeks. And probably for those who have gone into a severe stage, it's going to be even longer. So the other disconnecting factor that has been very prominently seen in this illness, unfortunately, is because of the medical need to keep yourself safe as a caregiver. The aspect of the PPE is coming in with the masks, with the gowns, with your face covered. It is almost a faceless robot that's coming into your life to give some injections or talk to you in a muffled voice. So one point of advice is make sure the face is shown to the family members, and use innovative technologies like video calls, FaceTimes, and I know a very innovative patient of mine who was so amazing. He had his loving wife next to him in a flat next door, and he had his FaceTime on with his computer on this side, watching her round the clock. And she had a sense that there was someone present there. I think you should be able to build that. There's a disconnect that has come because of the caution. We should be able to break those barriers by technology. And I think that's a big, builder where you could see the person at a distance and use this modern miracle called a video call or whatever kind of technology, even just an audio, a voice. There have been tragedies where people were so scared, be it the family member or the caregivers, of letting anybody even to come and see, that the last time they saw when the person was leaving the house for the hospital, and because of the fear of even collecting the body at the end of the day, there were situations which happened. I think we have grown wiser in that sense to be able to communicate better as days go by. I think time is really teaching us a lot of things. And I think no doctor can ever say that, well, I found the perfect system. But I think it's all about what is it that your heart says about compassion as to how do I want to communicate? How do I should not be the one disconnecting them from his usual relationships. The trust that he has is with his family members too. And once he sees a comfortable look on the family member that, yes, I trust this doctor, there goes a long way in the patient smiling at you and saying, I think the folks I trust you, so I trust you.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thing, because I've often said that, even though high tech may be the need of the minute, high touch is the need of life.
Absolutely.
It's human connection. Recently, I think we were on the same program where I was speaking, where someone had made the statement that the two words that are now very common in our virtual reality is unmute and disconnect. and unmute it's fascinating, because when we were growing up, our parents would ask us to be quiet, and now people are desperate. In fact, in the US, one thing they found out, that telecommunication companies increased the amount of data they were offering to the individual users, because they perceived that there would be an abundant need for visual communication. So they increased the data plan, only to realize that people did not want that. They needed to increase their voice plan, because people were now talking to telemarketers. Because they had been so disconnected from the world that they just needed someone to talk to. But one thing you bring up is the creative way of treatment, that if a person is isolated, nothing gives them joy than seeing an unmasked face that has a complete emotion. And that's possible virtually. You can be in another place free from the contaminated zone and still be allowed to give them hope as they are in those stages. Something my dad is going through now, because, as they're releasing those things, he says, son, at 86, I just need to see another person smile. I don't want my world, he says, some of us have better walls than other people's walls. So when I look at my wall, there's more stuff on my wall, but it's still a wall. So the beauty of your flat in no way negates the fact that no matter where you are in the world, if you're trapped without that human connectivity, it does start eating away at your psyche to some degree.
Yes, just imagine an iPad or something that is hung above the patient who's on a bed, and constantly he's with somebody as on a Zoom call. You could actually have it covered with a see-through sheet, which is not going to contaminate the device or whatever you're going to talk about. It's going to make a world of a difference in the confidence and hope that people have as they lie down in that bed.
It's amazing how we were so scared of devices because we thought we'd catch a virus on them. And now we use the devices to talk to people who have the virus in them. Because
I would call it an amazing blessing. What was not possible 20 years back. I think this is stunning. Again, that's where hope comes from, man's use of technology.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, the other thing is this concept of misinformation, because this is something we have talked to even without the pandemic. There is just something in this world that you know, when you diagnose people, you have a certain way. Each physician has a certain way in which they rely on their ability to prescribe. They rely on their, that whatever it is, each physician has a certain way. I remember recently I was scheduled to go through a medical procedure, and my doctor recommended me to another doctor. And I had been going to this doctor for whatever procedure I was going through to keep everything anonymous. I was going through this doctor for almost 30 years. And then he now needed me to go to see a specialist who could do something he couldn't do. So he says, I want you to go to this person. Well, I was quite apprehensive because now it's a new relationship for something that I had experienced for 30 years with one person. But it's fascinating how the other doctor treated me. When I sat down with him, he just looked at me and he says, don't worry, it'll all be okay. I said, yeah, before my doctor sent me to you, he told me that he himself was your patient. He says, I can't divulge that, but since he did, I'm glad he did. And I thought it was interesting that my doctor's only words of hope to me had nothing to do with the medical procedure that would still require me to have anesthesia and all that. But he says, you're in good hands because I myself was his patient. And
Very true.
that communication stuff, I think, is we need more of. There's a lot of miscommunication and it's all on panic. Why is it, do you think, that I understand the medias need to keep up their TRPs or whatever to constantly parade, not misinformation, but at least, you know, I recently said, if you, the word pandemic, the word dem means people, according to the Latin root. So if you take dem out of pandemic, you get panic.
Wow, that's so true.
So what they have done is they've taken people out and created panic. But what else does misinformation do to the course of the disease? I mean, as you treat people, you probably have seen that some of them have gone down a path of misinformation. You had to reel them back.
Very true. It is what you brought out is a very important aspect of an individual who's practicing with a particular set of standards. What is so interesting in this disease and tragic at the same time is the fragmentation of knowledge. You would have a person who would really sing a song about hydroxychloroquine. Mm-hmm. You would have somebody talk about methylene blue. You would have somebody talk about inhalation of hydrogen. Somebody would talk only about oxygen. Somebody would say it is zinc. Somebody would say, well, the list goes endlessly because each of them have had a very passionate experience with one of these things possibly. Mm-hmm. And I have seen, a TV program which went around talking about vitamin D as a magical cure and saying that though vitamin D has a role, there's absolutely no doubt about that. But and in fact, most people are vitamin D deficient, and to bring it up to a normal level enables you to fight the disease better. There's nothing wrong with that. But to call COVID a vitamin D deficiency syndrome kind of thing, there has been so much that has gone around as misinformation. WhatsApp has been a curse and a blessing. Mm. It's connected so much of people, but it's actually disconnected their reason from their very lives, because what they're doing is they're becoming slaves to whatever information that's been forwarded to them. They could be a mere scamming, spamming, whatever is coming across, just to push forward one man's opinion or just a bunch of people. Having said that, the scientific community did come up with certain parameters which would say it is good to try. And in a very humane process, drugs have been fast-tracked for use. What has been used in Ebola has been brought as a fast-track to be used in SARS-CoV-2. The reason was that there is possibly, it's good to give a benefit of doubt for people. There was no common platform to get this knowledge. WHO would have one set of things and say a national board can have something else or another country can have something else. Having said that, there was something which evolved as a bunch of treatment modalities, including supportive treatments and drugs which were specifically antivirals, which came along the course of the last 8 months. Okay. So as knowledge is evolving, people have got stuck, learned or unlearned. If a doctor is not a learner, he's going to be a very bad doctor. And it's very vital to be humble enough to say, I don't know the whole thing. Sorry. I'm doing my best within the knowledge I have, but I'm going to update myself and be competent in what's going on around the world and offer that as the best. In situations of panic, there is a bad faith that can also rise up in things which are something like what I said. You just put all eggs in one basket. It is multimodality. The disease affects in multitudes of ways, and it's multifactorial, the way it hits the body. So you got to have multi-pronged approach. It can't just be one thing. I can't just say it's steroids. I can't just say it is anticoagulants. I can't just say it is this antiviral. It's all this together, and each patient is individual.
Okay.
So this glut of information has caused people a lot of harm, because you have a treating physician and someone comes along and says, how come my relative is not getting this drug? You know, this is supposed to be given. And I said, wow, I think you should have Google as your doctor then.
Right.
So see, this is true, actually, in a sense, what you raised. In a way, misinformation has affected doctors themselves and also patients and relatives and caregivers, to the point that it has interrupted relationships at times.
Oh, wow.
There could be situations where you would have to say, sorry, if you're consulting with 10 people and getting confused, I'm out of the picture, because it's going to harm you. Too many cooks actually spoil the broth. And this is actually happening in a big way, because everyone is an expert. I mean, you're asking me, I'm not an expert. I mean, from my own scientific field, in a way of mine, as a medical doctor, but I'm not the authority on anything. But having said that, we follow certain authorities and say, this is what we are following. But believe me, we have had everybody wanting to come into the picture of giving an advice. Your next door neighbor, to a person who is recovered, to a person who is watching some treatment going on, or you name it, everyone has an opinion. And that is what is actually hitting very hard in this time of the pandemic, where trust is getting eroded, because suddenly you see, oh, this is not being given to me, or being given to me, the other patient, and it's happening like that. Until we get an actual standard of care in a very concerted manner, there are going to be differences in the way people are going to take it, because people are naturally suspicious about the pharma industry, the big pharma as they call it. So a genuine drug which has been developed painstakingly could be looked down upon as just a gimmick, economic gimmick, and which is unfair at times. You know, people have done lots of research, but in I think I'd probably come to that later. And economically, challenged areas, this is going to be a major factor where the big pharma is looked down upon and said, let me look at something which is more affordable for me that I can use. And thankfully, I would say thank God for that, is that there have been many inexpensive treatments also that have been used very effectively over the period of time. And probably we can discuss that later.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting thing, but you know me, I always try to find wisdom in what's said and see if I can capture it in a way that when I re-say it, I sound smarter than anybody else in the room. But you said something very profound. A doctor who is not learning is a bad doctor, to which I added, a patient who is learned is still not a doctor. So, there's those lines. But when you bring up economic disenfranchisement and all of those, those are some of the big issues we're fighting globally. In America, the Center for Disease Control here has relaxed some of the restrictions on the quarantines yesterday by coming out with something else saying, even if you come in from overseas, 14 days is not required or whatever. And then if you're asymptomatic and you've been around someone who you think had it and you're asymptomatic, doesn't mean you have to get tested, whatever. We're finding out that some, as you mentioned, just like the virus will attack different people differently, each patient will respond to different treatments differently. I know, for example, when I go through the common flu, I take a little longer to come out of it because of the fact that, I was a smoker at one time. There was, whatever it is, lung capacities and all of that stuff. So my doctor prescribes a more aggressive regimen for me than he would for my wife, who has pre-existing conditions, and he has to take her down a different path. So this is the other thing. When we are listening to information, But this goes back to, I'm of course, I always come and try to create a faith angle to whatever I do, but, 7.85 billion people on planet Earth, and God in his infinite wisdom made each one different.
Absolutely.
And those of us who are married, our spouses are saying, thank God, because two of you would be unbearable. But what I want to do is also, just for those who are still, there are about 15 or 16 people who have joined, and some have sent messages saying that they'll watch the video. But please get your questions ready if you need to get on the chat platform. And after Doc addresses the pharma issue, if he wants to address that, or the economic issue in terms of how you would go about getting the help you need, and maybe some personal perspective on the people he himself has treated within his small group of folks that he has been treating for this virus. We can jump into the Q&A time. So queue up your questions and chat if you want those answered. And for whatever reason, if you can't stay, we'll answer them and you can access a recording. And then I'll try to let you in live to ask your question. And I think we have a person who wants to speak to us live who's actually going through it as well, if we can get that connection made. All right, Doc, why don't you just give your thoughts on some of the other things that you had that you wanted to address that I didn't ask.
I was just looking at an amazing model, which is a syndromic approach that two wonderful physicians from CMC Vellore had brought out a syndromic approach in areas where testing is not possible. There was a whole period of maybe 2 to 3 months when the tests were not available, and the test kits which came were substandard, and they were giving inaccurate results. Either they are very low in sensitivity or specificity. And they suggested a syndromic approach, that these are the typical symptoms we find, say fever or dysgeusia or dysosmia or change of smell or taste, and the specific features and diarrhea, a whole list of them. And they divided them into major and minor criteria and said, if you're going to have a bunch of these, you're very likely that you're going to have it. Forget even about the test. Now, that is in economically challenged areas where you need to, where I would say so-called resource poor zones, where you could actually use a syndromic approach. It's very vital to recognize that this is not just technology alone, but it's your clinical experience which actually matters a lot in diagnosing this particular illness. And treatment could be started empirically. Once you can always confirm the disease by these other tests. Now, there have been a big controversy on test kits that are available, the multitudes that have popped up, over the period, and standards are not being, kept up at times. So we are living in very changing times. And by the time we would get to know all the best of scenarios of how to actually diagnose, use the right kind of kits and methods, we would be passing, most of the peak would be gone by the time. But it's going to be a major learning factor in the days to come about anything that's going to happen in the future. If you are actually surprised at the way in 6 months, FDA has fast-tracked some of the drugs, and vaccine is going to come out in 6 to 9 months, which is phenomenal because typically it takes about 3 to 9 years. Wow. By the very look at the phase 1, 2, phase 3 trials and post-release clinical trials. This is something which is amazing because we are already standing on the shoulders of this giant called SARS-1, which happened in 2003, if you remember. Yeah. The MERS SARS. It's a very similar virus, and literally you've looked at what the virus is looking like, the spike protein, and how to actually create a vaccine for that. So what has gone by has given us an impetus and a kickstart, much better than any other illness, pandemic in the past. So I'm mentioning, almost ambivalently that there is this aspect, the tension of the thing peaking and going on, yet we are also making a lot of progress. So I just wanted to make a comment on that. And on the pharmaceutical industry, there has been a big rush of costly medications, yes. but people have had great success with the simple drugs like hydroxychloroquine. It is very interesting to note that the scientific community was very shocked. Two of the most respected journals in the world, that's Lancet from UK and the New England Journal of Medicine from USA, both had to retract their papers when it came to critiquing or criticizing the good effects of hydroxychloroquine and looking at so-called side effects which are actually harmful. And both these respected journals had to withdraw that paper because of lack of integrity on data. That's what I said initially when I said the scientific community also is in a panic mode to publish and to bring out evidence. And in this sense of hurry, they've made errors. And this is something serious because the vast global community is looking at the scientific community for honesty. And I think I'm so glad that both Lancet and NEJM very to their, for their level of trust that they build with people across, decades, they published the retraction in a very clear manner as to why they felt that they should withdraw. It is not about making a mistake. It's about how you correct it. Sure. I think that actually builds a lot of trust amongst even the medical professionals and the medical professionals to the community. So I think these are two comments that I just wanted to bring up from a scientific perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you were sharing that, I was thinking back to something John Lennox had said some years ago, when he says, ethics does not need science to survive, but science needs ethics to be relevant.
Absolutely.
There has to be a good and a bad about it. I mean, Isaac Newton and Stephen Hawking both held the same chair at Cambridge, the Lucasian chair of mathematics. Both were physicists and both had this prestigious chair. One talked about God as the reason why he says, I can explain what gravity is, I can explain how it works, but I cannot explain why it exists. And Hawking came to the exact opposite conclusion. He says, because gravity exists, I can tell you there is no God. So, but both held the same chair. And so interestingly enough, as much as we rely on the science for some of our own satisfaction, science has to give its own answers. And I don't think any two scientists will necessarily have to agree because we've seen them all over. If there are any people who have questions that you want to ask a question live, just unmute yourself and I think it should pop up and we can then go from there and you can ask the doctor a question regarding that. If there's someone who has a comment that they want to make, this is your time. We just want to open it up for you before we call it a day. We want to make sure we stay under that hour in some way. So we wanted to go about 40 minutes, which we have successfully done. And okay, here's a question. There's so much we're hearing about people recontracting COVID. However, it's not as adverse as the first time. Will a vaccine actually help our generation? Or is it really going to benefit only the next generation who will take it as part of their vaccine list?
I think that's a brilliant question. Thanks for asking. I think I'd look at the vaccine aspect first. I'd look at the patient aspect first. There are what are called neutralizing antibodies, which are produced as the natural policeman of the body to police the infection that's going on. And as we discussed it in an individual basis, based on the severity of the load of the agent and the ability of the host to develop the immune response, you have a variation of these neutralizing antibodies, which are called the typical IgG antibodies, which protect a person to the tune that it is being used as therapy for people who have recovered from severe illnesses. Their plasma, implying the antibody sitting in the plasma, is being taken as therapy for severe cases because they have found a way to fight the virus. And that's being taken and borrowed from somebody like a blood donation and having the plasma being used in severe cases successfully at times. So the immunity is for real, but immunity, whether it's going to be protective for long, no. They found that within about 90 days from the illness that they've had, there has been a waning down, exponentially down of these neutralizing antibodies. So the illness per se, it may not be protecting you for too long, maybe not beyond 2 to 3 months if it goes beyond that. So that is probably the reason in that window of 90 days that people are actually having, any kind of phenomenon again. But I doubt if there has been a huge cohort that has studied any kind of a reinfection kind of scenario. Having said that, it's a similar mechanism. When you talk about a vaccine that's being developed, it is for real. The spike protein, that little corona ball that you see with those spikes, the spike protein happens to be a major culprit in both the SARS. And this spike protein is something which is actually goes in and catches the cup of what's called an AC2 inhibitor, angiotensin converting enzyme, angiotensin converting enzyme 2 receptor, not inhibitor, AC2 receptor. And that's how it goes into the cell. Now, there are multiple targets coming on, and anti-spike is coming up as a vaccine modality in the days to come, which is for real. And there is hope that this would be a protective vaccine, though there are lots of variations as to how to study an immune response in the first place. The trials that have gone on as phase 1s have shown promise. What they do is they study safety first, they study safety efficacy next, then they study safety efficacy and regulation next, and then they do a population study. So as it goes on through these, not only has it been found to be safe, probably efficacious, and these antibodies will last longer. You might require a 6-month, a booster shot after 6 months or after a year, or an annual shot like a flu shot, because the antigenicity or the spike might vary in the next iteration that comes. But we are going to have a series of these vaccines that are going to come up, just like what happens. A flu vaccine is not the same that you take the last year. The swine flu vaccine and the flu shot together that you take annually is modified every year based on the antigens that are there in the recent virus that is hit. So it's a very changing virus, but thankfully, in this, the good news of SARS-CoV-2, CoV-2 is that there has not been too much of an antigenic variation. That's a lot of good news. When it comes to a vaccine, I think it's really going to be hopeful that despite them not reaching phase 3 trials and beyond, I think we are going to have soon vaccines coming up in a protective manner, for sure. I think this is something which the scientific community has held on very closely, to the point that there are umpteen vaccines, probably nearly 100 are being developed across the globe. So which of them wins in a large trial, we have to see. The challenge with a vaccine, you have to remember, is that the vaccinated population should also be in a hotspot. There's no point in vaccinating a population which is not a hotspot. And then what is it being, what is it protecting from? So there should be an overlap of a hotspot population and a vaccinated population, which is itself an epidemiological challenge. So I guess we have to see how things go, but I'm sure, given the expertise of many of these fields of epidemiologists who are studying it in a very deep manner, and the virologists, I think we're very hopeful that this is going to happen for real.
Well, that answered my question on the flu, because that was a question I get a lot, saying that even if you have the flu vaccine every year, which I take a flu shot every year, some people still get the flu. But I never thought that, the vaccine itself is something that is improved every year based on the virality of the last round of influenza, or whatever the last strain of influenza.
Antigenic variations, antigenic shifts and drifts, these are things which happen along, for example, a pandemic. What's interesting is that the antigenicity of the current virus is not changing very rapidly. And that's a saving grace, because it's a silver lining in the clouds. Had that happened, I think we would have faced a much tougher challenge.
Here's another question, and this comes from here in Dallas. Global travel has been significantly impacted by COVID. This has disconnected so many of us from friends and family. What do you feel needs to happen before people once again feel comfortable with international travel, so that we can once again reconnect with each other? What are some of the moods that what are some of the things that need to exist out there before people start feeling comfortable to get past this fear so that we can at least reconnect?
I think more or less it's the looking at a peak. I mean, people are very smart at looking at the stock market in a way as to, no, though it's not very predictable, people actually, put in a lot of money into things. I'm not saying it's something like that, but there has been a predictable aspect in the current pandemic is the fact of a spike, probably a smaller secondary spike that might happen, but eventually it's seen a wane. And I think nobody has done as good as maybe the Scandinavian countries, or, well, I think the amazing Prime Minister of New Zealand, who has made COVID to be just a 4-figure entity with a 2-figure death rate, mortality. I think, but it has also costed them a lot from an economic perspective.
Sure.
To deal. So I think eventually it is a matter of time that this will wane away. And the cases are getting milder and milder as days go by. As community transmission happens, the virulence of the organism also reduces. So you're going to see more and more asymptomatic or milder and moderate cases rather than the very severe ones which were there, unfortunately and tragically so. Never to discount the tragedy of what happened in the initial stages of this pandemic.
Well, yeah, and that brings, something I can probably throw light on as well in terms of the human understanding of this. What fear is, they say fear and faith have the same definition. They are both based on the unknowable and the unquantifiable. So what happens is, for people to overcome fear, they have to have faith that they can indeed survive this, that there is good advice now that wasn't prevalent 9 months ago, that if they do contract it in some way, that the treatment options are more systematic. There is more of a linear progression to people understanding this. So I'm seeing that as part of, it's not normalcy. People are still traveling with their masks and all of that other stuff and taking the necessary precautions. But I think as time goes by, those that want to will adjust. But humanity has had this ability throughout the history to be resilient. We did it after World War II. We did it after Vietnam. We did it after 9/11. We did it after 26/11 in India. So what happens is, one of the things I give as someone who studies human anthropology is that there are 3 components to any adaptation. The first is the givens. The givens is this thing is here to stay in some way. It will morph in some ways. If it's not this, it will come as some other way. We know that's a given. We know that the governments have proven that they can protect you by, or inhibit you, whichever way you want to perceive that, by locking you down. Those are givens. You and I cannot do anything about the givens. It's just something you wake up and it exists. The second are the uncontrollables. When it will happen, how it will happen, how quickly it will happen. We didn't, I read a joke the other day that was quite fascinating. Who would have thought that someone eating a live bat in a wet market in China would cause the world to shut down? Nobody thought that. But that's human thing. Going back to ER's question, because of the fact that travel is the way this thing spread, airplanes are the way it goes, there is a primary thing, but there are those of us that can't wait to get back on because of the fact that we know that these other factors will apply. If I do feel sick, I don't get on a plane. If I'm sick after a flight, I go get tested. And I think that becomes part, because humanity will continue. That life has to, we can't stop living. One question came from on WhatsApp University. On WhatsApp University. How do we manage our emotional health as we go through the lockdown slow? I did something earlier called Liberation During Lockdown, which may address this. On the skylifesuccess.com website, there are a bunch of papers we have written, and there may be audio recordings on there as well where we have addressed this topic. But I'll give you the 3 principles that are paramount when you want to address anything emotionally. First is look at it factually, in the sense that, will this affect you directly, or are you reacting to this indirectly? A majority of our emotional breakdown is indirect, which is what we call anticipatory grief. I buried a friend. When I finally prayed for him at his casket, I wailed. But I knew he was going to die for 10 years. He had had 2 liver transplants. There's no such thing as anticipatory grief. When it hits you, it will hit you real. So don't deal in facts. Don't deal in that anticipatory grief. The second is have an inner circle of hope, which means have someone you can talk to who is either in an authority or an expert. Don't believe everybody who comes down the pike. So first, deal in facts. Second, have an inner circle. Third, make sure that you are taking all the precautions. And when you talk about emotional and job loss, I'm talking about we have learned more in this time about what we can't do, what we can do without. We have learned more about, in fact, one preacher said that his father used to have a room upstairs in their little farmhouse, and he would welcome all these traveling evangelists, and he would welcome them up and take them up, and he'd give them a towel, a bar of soap, but the roof is over their head. They just eaten dinner. He said, if you need anything tonight, please come down and I will tell you what you can do without till morning. So those are facts that exist, inner circle of people who can help you. And third, take the necessary precautions now to learn, to earn, to invest, to save. John Wesley's model is probably the best for the third category. Make sure that you're putting away, and at this time, make sure you're giving away to those that can't put away. In business, the principle we have followed to maintain our sanity is accept from those that can afford you, negotiate with those that are new, and offer it as charity to those that cannot afford you. And I think that model will give you a healthy self-balance that not only are you helping, but you're helping others. Glad to hear that we're also part of the target audience. Thank you, Doc, for that question. Anybody else want to ask a live question? You're welcome to, but if you're not, that's fine as well. I've already taken a
I wanted to make a comment on certain risk stratification wise. It is good to mention this word of caution for those who have what are called comorbid conditions like diabetes, hypertension, chronic kidney disease, immune disorders, chronic lung diseases. I think these are entities which have known to actually, and age, of course, more than 65 years of age, been known to be higher risk factors. So for those who belong to these categories, it is wise to actually exercise caution in a very intentional way, rather than say a young robust person who is going around in the days to come. But having said that, it is good to be cautious. Panic and overcautiousness and paranoia is not what's going to do any good. And it is happening in places where one person is positive in a huge apartment block, and it's almost as if a bombshell fell on the apartment block, and everybody's paralyzed. They don't want to get out of their flats. So I think this is an attitude that one should develop as a gracious attitude towards those who are sick. Already they're isolated. Imagine the kind of stigma they can have if they're sitting at home, ashamed to even tell that they're actually positive. And the whole community is looking at you as one to shift the blame onto. Because of you, you brought a whole, bad deal into this community of mine. I think that is an attitude which should be dealt with very consciously, and people should be more gracious in the days to come. It's going to hit somebody or the other close by or yourself, and it's only a matter of time. So it's good to be gracious and willing to help rather than blame and then push them aside. So I just wanted to make a comment on that.
No, that's one of the things that I have noticed where the human generosity factor, many people have gone out of their way to provide the meals and they were masked up and all that, but you have to take care. We are asked as the church to take care of the widows and orphans and the infirmed. And right now there's a large populace of people that cannot fend for themselves. So I've always advocated that if you have a roof over your head and you have 2 square meals a day going into your belly and you have electricity to, our idle time is watching all kinds of television shows. My wife says yesterday, she says, when do you think this will end? I said, when we run out of things to watch, at which point we'll go, but here's another question that came. And of course, both of us are, have a faith that guides us. So this is a question relating to church. It says, church is supposed to be the healing factor, but we shut the doors now. The word says, preach the good news, heal the sick, cast away. How do we relate this? And I can answer it, but how do you relate to the fact that churches are closed at this time? Of course, ours is open, so I'll address it from that standpoint.
Oh, you wanted me to answer first? Okay.
Yeah.
Firstly, church is a community and not a building. And I think it's not about a particular place that you go to worship. And I believe strongly that wherever people are, that is the body of Christ, wherever it exists. Even if it's so-called fragmented and not meeting, yes, it does say when 2 or 3 are gathered together, and 2 or 3 are already there at home with you probably. You already have a quorum for reaching out to God, firstly. There's no point in getting depressed about the fact that the doors of the church are closed. It could be a governmental rule. It could be a matter of the way you're seating in the church is about physical distancing being not possible at times, or people's attitudes as to how they're going to behave. So if somebody is going to be very responsible in the way they're going to congregate, there's nothing wrong with opening the churches. And I'm sure that many are doing it in that same fashion. And also, it also beats that aspect of living with fear kind of thing. And here you go fearlessly out there. But merely to test God and to challenge may not be all that wise. It's good to understand and go according to the law of the land for sure, and take the liberty in a very responsible manner. I would say a responsible freedom is wise in the way you mask yourself up or maintain a physical distancing, not jeopardizing the other person's safety. You're well off. And truly, it's not that the doors of the church are shut. The doors of Christ are never shut if the church physically closes down. I believe that strongly. So I take that perspective. And I think, yeah, that's what I would say.
I think someone who has actually been a patient of it would like to share their experience. So there you are. I think.
All right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. I'm able to unmute myself.
Okay.
And I hope I'm audible as well.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity to hear out. And sorry. And for so clearly laying out what this COVID is all about. And I'd just like to quickly, probably in a couple of minutes, share my experience. So it all started with my husband first contracting it. And it's like a 1+1 offer, I guess. So he got it, and then it came on to me. And since it was a 1+1, I was expecting it to be exactly the same. So he recovered in like 2 weeks' time straight, and he's a lot better now. His 3rd week now, and he's doing well. But I'm in my 3rd week now, and I didn't follow his footsteps. And my recovery has been much slower. So initially it was all hunky-dory. Okay, he's going through it. He's doing okay. I'll be okay. But when things didn't go the same path, that's when I think a lot of worry started coming in, a lot of tension and uncertainty started stepping in. But I'd like to say that while all of this is there, we had a panel of doctors, experts in their areas. We had my sister also, who's a nurse, who kind of spoke about it in very clear terms. I mean, this is not a disease that can pull you down. It's only a willpower that will pull you down. It's not the disease that can make you go down the drain. So always keep your spirits high. Don't be tensed. Eat well. Focus on your immunity. Because what I heard was that if you get tensed, your lungs get constricted, which means your airflow is not as good as it should be, and thereby oxygen reduces. And then, I mean, I know the technical, I'm not a very medically technical person, but yeah, in layman's terms, that's my understanding about it. Yeah, so then, of course, the doctors and the nurses were really great. And I was in India. If you go to the hospital, then until you recover, you will not see anybody else. You will not see your family members. So that was the scare that kind of got hold of me. And I am separate in an apartment, and it's quite scary to be there by yourself, no human faces. And thankfully, my husband was able to set up a FaceTime call 24 by 7. So I'm actually able to see somebody live on the other side, be it my husband or the maid or somebody walking in and out. So that kind of eased my mind to an extent. And there were talks about hospitalization, but the good thing is that since you all had brought about faith, I want to talk about faith as well here, that all the doctors who were treating me are all God-fearing doctors, Christian doctors, and they always point to me first that the greatest physician is Jesus Christ our Lord. And
Amen.
then we come in next. And that was such a great encouragement. And then we had, and also thank you for bringing out about the church, though church being shut, I think the body of Christ is the church today. And even though we don't meet in the church premises, we are all united in Jesus. And we have an army of family, friends who've been constantly praying, encouraging us from the word. And that kind of brought me out of the despair that I was going through the last week. And every day we've been seeing new mercies in ways unimaginable, in ways we have never even thought it could have come out. And I'm going through treatment at home. By God's grace, it's been going well, and I'm doing well. And of course, there were, sorry. So we had a lot of family friends also who are doctors who've been constantly advising us. This doctor has only these 2 combinations of drugs, or oh, that person recovered in a week's time. Why are you taking so long? But what I finally had to tell them, I know everybody has the best of intentions for me. Nobody is gaining anything out of my experience. It's all that I should be well. At the same time, I also mentioned that I trust the doctors who are treating me. And when they came to know who I was getting treated, oh, then you're in safe hands. Then it turned out that way. So that way it worked very well, that people have been sharing their concern for me. And I'm really glad that I've been recovering well so long. And family, friends, their doctors, everyone's encouragement is much needed. I think when we speak about encouraging people, I think that's what lifts people up. While the medications are there, people may say, okay, this medication worked for me, why is it not working for you? Also, I think people should realize it's not a one size that fits all. What worked for you will not necessarily work for me. So,
Yes.
I mean, like I see it between my husband and I, right? So he's out of it in 2 weeks, and here I am in the 3rd week and still recovering. So thank you very much for the opportunity to share. But really grateful
how anxious did you feel that the treatment was actually happening at home and not in a hospital scenario? Yes, you said you did not want to go to a hospital, but were you very anxious for the fact that it's all at home, it's going to be very risky, or you felt in retrospect also that this was the best choice that you could have made?
Oh, I did not. I mean, the hospitalization bit was the last thing I wanted to do. I knew I was in safe hands, best hands in terms of doctors and the nurses. And of course, God is above all, whether at home or at the hospital. God is in control. That was the first thing. Second thing is, because of the capable hands that I was in, I had no doubt about wanting to go to the hospital at all. I was very happy getting treated at home, doctor, and very comfortable having it done at home.
I think that the trust element helped you a lot in this aspect is what I can read. And
Yes,
that is, I think, your testimony of encouragement that in this scenario where the hospitals are getting flooded, there are avenues of treatment at home, and you should not have a knee-jerk response to run off to a hospital for every infection. I think your case, in a sense, has proven that with encouragement, Ms. Rita. So thanks for sharing that. If brother Krish has questions on that.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing from the perspective of someone who is actually going through it. Sometimes for those of us on the outside, it's easier to give commentary as spectators, but it's much easier to take advice from people who are actually participating in this process right now. So thank you for your courage, and we'll continue to uphold you in prayer that you rely. One thing I did get from when you were speaking is the words that come to me in assurance is that when you have faith, even though you're lonely, you're never alone.
Absolutely.
And
Yes.
you know, my mentor, Mr. Ziegler, used to say, "You plus God equals enough." That's all the
Absolutely.
mathematics means.
Yeah. So I'd get more specific, saying Jesus plus nothing is all I need. It's good enough.
Thank you so much for willing to come on and share your experience. Folks, as we wind up, we are past the hour mark. I think we've got some good discussion points going in. One of the questions the doc answered as far as the church is concerned, our church opened after an absence where we took all the precautions. We went from one service to two services. We spread out the people in the congregation by making sure that in service one, row one was occupied, service two, row two, and so on. We alternated. There was a wash down between services. Now, here's the interesting thing. You can take all those precautions. You can do all of that. But at the end of the day, you have to have faith as to why you went in there and why you came out. The whole point is man was never designed for isolation. The reason we need corporate worship is not so that we are defying orders or not that we are going to take less precautions. Humanity needs to congregate and cry out for revival. That is the responsibility. Sometimes what happens is we are so fixated by regulation, our response is usually revolutionary. But if we're fixated on responsibility, our response will be revival, said Adrian Rogers. So you take the responsibility, and if I know people who cannot meet because of their communities are not allowing it because of restriction, but they have large homes. So what they did was they opened up their home every day of the week to accommodate 25 people. And at the end of the week, they got all of them in church. You can have music piped in. I participated in virtual services all over the world. But here's the thing. Do not be away from the word of God because you're afraid of the world of God. All right, so that with that, we'll say adios to everybody. Doc, any final words? We call this Doc and Paradox. As you probably figured out, I'm a paradox. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I don't have a starting point. I don't have a finishing point. But I surround myself by people who do. Like Shelley bailed me out during telling me how to get Miss Daniel on. But why don't you give us some closing words, Doc?
I just wanted to say that this pandemic has brought out the best of humanity and the worst of humanity. And I think we should choose the best. Mm-hmm. To be a better human being, to be a more compassionate human being, to know that it's not just a battle for your life, but your neighbors, your friends, your communities, and the world. I think one should have a prayer not just for oneself, but for a family, a community, and the world, that we would be out of this ditch and this depressive time to come up with a hopeful moment that is going to come. And I think I would just say that let this pandemic bring out the best in you. I think that's all I would have to say.
Yeah, aptly put. That's why Charles Dickens in his Tale of Two Cities said it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And right now we have every city has two tales. Isn't that fascinating? He wrote that in 1859. So we're in interesting times. Thanks a lot, everybody. And I think for the little hiccups we had in between, I think we'll try to do our magic and try to edit that out. But if you feel this thing is worthwhile and the discussion was good, please let us know and we'll make sure we get you a copy of the recording.
One last thought,
Sure.
Dr. Krish. I just wanted to mention that a good source versus a bad source of information. I did mention a couple of names as good sources of information. And one of the best journals that I've enjoyed as a doctor is the New England Journal of Medicine and Lancet. Don't take it wrongly when I talked about the retracted stories, but they did retract it at the end of the day. They didn't con you, did they? And it is good to have such trustworthy articles. And it's amazing that they have given all their COVID-related articles for free for the entire globe. They are not charged. COVID articles in NEJM, which is one of the most respected journals, is for free. Just go to that, read up all about that you want to, starting from about vaccine developments to hand washing to disinfection to whatever. All kinds of protocols are there for you to read. and it is coming from the best. And CDC guidelines are good, WHO guidelines are good. I think it's good to, though some of the institutions have lost its credibility or have a reduced credibility at this point of time, it is not good to be cynical about these, but to be hopeful and to also wisely weigh what you're reading exactly.
Well, appreciate that, Doc. Thank you, everybody. And from Dallas, Texas, and from Hyderabad, India, God bless.
Thank you. God bless you.